A single mother walked out of a federal prison after 5 years. Her daughter was standing at the gate, but she wasn't alone. A man neither of them should have known was holding her hand. He wasn't her father. He wasn't a relative. He wasn't a social worker. He wasn't from the state. He was something far more complicated. And what he had done during those 5 years, the choices he had made, the secrets he had carried, would unravel everything she thought she knew about guilt, about punishment, and about the world that had locked her away. 32-year-old Renee Douglas had spent 1,887 days preparing for this moment. She had rehearsed it in her cell at night, whispered it into her pillow like a prayer. The gate would open, she would walk out, the sun would hit her face, and somehow everything stolen from her would start coming back. That is not what happened. The gate at Federal Correctional Institution Danbury buzzed open at 9:14 on an October morning, and Renee stepped through it, carrying everything she owned in a clear plastic bag. 3 letters from her daughter written in crayon and pencil. Over 5 years, the handwriting growing from clumsy loops to something almost legible. One Polaroid photograph faded at the edges of a 5-year-old girl with braids and a gap-toothed smile sitting on a kitchen counter in Hartford. And $47.30 earned over 60 months of labor inside those walls, folding laundry, mopping hallways, scrubbing toilets at 23 cents an hour. That was it. That was the total value of 5 years of Renee Douglas's life, sealed in a bag you could see straight through. Freedom tasted like cold October air, and tasted nothing like she had imagined. There was no warmth in it, no relief, just a raw, hollow ache spreading through her chest like frost on glass. She stood outside the gate, and the sky was enormous, too enormous. For 5 years, every space had been measured. 8 by 10 cell, 12-foot hallway, 40-foot yard. Now, the world stretched out in every direction, with no walls, no schedule, no one telling her where to stand or when to breathe. Freedom felt heavier than the cell she had left behind. The parking lot was half empty, cracked asphalt, a chain-link fence lined with dead ivy. Beyond it, a 2-lane road leading to a Connecticut town that did not know her name and would not care to learn it. Renee blinked against the light. Her eyes had grown used to fluorescent ceilings. Real sunlight hurt. Then she saw them. 2 figures standing near a black SUV at the far end of the lot. One tall, one small. The small one wore a pink jacket and held something close to her body, some kind of stuffed animal tucked under her arm. The tall one stood with his hands in his pockets, still as stone. Renee's breath stopped. 5 years. The last time she had touched her daughter Lyric was 5 years old, 41 inches tall, 28 braids that took 2 hours every Sunday. A laugh so loud the neighbors complained. Favorite word was why. Favorite food was strawberry yogurt. Favorite thing in the world was falling asleep in her mother's arms while Renee hummed songs she had learned from her own mother's songs. With no titles, just melodies passed down like heirlooms nobody else wanted. That little girl was gone. The child standing by the SUV was 10, taller, thinner. Her face had lost the roundness of baby fat and found the sharper angles of a girl who had learned hard things too early. Her braids were different. Someone else had done them. Someone else had learned which side she parted her hair on. Someone else had picked out that pink jacket and those white sneakers and whatever stuffed animal she clutched like a shield against the world. Renee did not run. Her legs would not move. Not because she was not desperate to hold her daughter. She was desperate in ways that language could not reach. But something darker held her in place. Fear. Not fear of the open sky or the unfamiliar road. Fear that the girl by the SUV would look at her and see a stranger. Fear that 5 years had done what prison was designed to do, erase her. Not just from freedom, but from the only person she had ever lived for. And then there was the man, tall, well-dressed, standing beside her daughter with the ease of someone who belonged there. His hand was not on Lyric's shoulder, but his presence was close enough to say something Renee could feel in her bones. He was not a corrections officer. He was not a social worker. He was not anyone Renee had been told to expect. He was just there, with her child, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Renee Douglas had spent 5 years preparing for this moment. But nothing inside those walls had prepared her for the stranger holding her daughter's hand. She swallowed hard, gripped the plastic bag tighter, and walked toward them on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Renee studied the man as she got closer. The details came in pieces, each one wrong. His watch caught the morning sun, silver band, heavy face. The kind of watch that cost more than the bail she could not afford 5 years ago. His shoes were leather, clean. Not a scuff on them, not a crease, like they had never touched anything dirtier than polished wood. His jacket was dark tailored, cut close to broad shoulders in a way that whispered money so quietly you had to listen carefully to hear it. He drove a black Range Rover. She could see it behind him, parked at an angle like the lot was his. The windows were tinted. The plates were Massachusetts. His shoes alone probably cost more than every commissary purchase she had made in 5 years combined. Every ramen packet, every bar of soap, every phone card she bought to call a daughter who sometimes picked up and sometimes didn't. Everything about him screamed wrong. A man like this had no business standing in the parking lot of a federal women's prison on a Tuesday morning. A man like this had no business knowing her daughter's name. A man like this did not show up unless he wanted something, and Renee had spent 5 years learning that people who wanted something from you rarely told you what it was until it was too late. Lyric saw her. The girl's body moved first instinct, pulling her forward 2 steps before her mind caught up. Then she stopped, right there in the middle of the parking lot, halfway between the man and her mother, frozen in that terrible space where love and confusion collide. She looked at Renee. Then she looked back at him. A 10-year-old girl should not have to calculate which adult is safe to run toward, but Lyric did. And that half-second pause, that tiny hesitation, cut deeper than any sentence a judge had ever handed down. The man spoke first. "She's been counting the days, Miss Douglas." His voice was low, calm, the kind of calm that comes from control, not peace. He said her name like he had practiced it, like he had read it in a file somewhere and decided in advance how to pronounce it with just enough respect to disarm her. Renee did not answer. She dropped to her knees on the cracked asphalt. The plastic bag hit the ground. The Polaroid slid halfway out, and she opened her arms. Lyric came, slowly, not running, not crying, just walking with careful steps, her arms still wrapped around that stuffed animal, a giraffe, old, worn, thin, missing one eye. Renee pulled her close and held on. Her arms locked around the child like she was trying to absorb 5 years of absence through skin and bone. Lyric smelled like lavender shampoo and fabric softener. Clean smells, safe smells, the smells of a home Renee had not provided. Her daughter's hair was neat. Her jacket was warm. Her shoes were new. Whoever this man was, he had taken care of her child. And that truth should have been a comfort. It burned instead, because in that embrace, while Renee pressed her face into her daughter's hair and felt the small arms slowly wrap around her neck, she noticed something that shattered her from the inside. Lyric was hugging her, but Lyric's eyes were looking back, over her mother's shoulder, at him. The girl's body was in her mother's arms, but her sense of safety lived somewhere else. 5 years ago, Renee was everything to this child, her world, her home, her reason for laughing. Now she was the woman in the parking lot who smelled like institution soap and wore clothes from 2019 that no longer fit a body. Prison had starved and hardened. Renee held tighter. She whispered into Lyric's hair words she had rehearsed 1,000 nights. "Mama's here. Mama's here. I'm not going anywhere," Lyric whispered back. "Just one word. Okay. Not, I missed you. Not, I love you. Not, Mommy. Just okay." And Renee knew right there on her knees in that parking lot, holding a daughter she barely recognized and being watched by a man she did not trust, that getting out of prison was the easy part. Getting her daughter back was going to be the war of her life. 5 years before that October morning, before the plastic bag and the parking lot and the stranger with clean shoes, there was a night in Hartford that broke everything. Renee Douglas lived in a studio apartment on Wethersfield Avenue. 400 square feet, one window, a kitchen that was really just a counter and a microwave. Lyric slept in a toddler bed, pushed against the wall surrounded by stuffed animals. Renee bought one at a time from the dollar store whenever she could spare $1. Lyric was 5, and Lyric was sick. Sickle cell disease, the kind that does not wait, the kind that turns a child's own blood against her warping red cells into crescent shapes that clog vessels, starve organs, and send pain ripping through tiny bones like electric fire. 1 in every 365 black children in America is born with it. Lyric was one. The treatment was not optional. Blood transfusions every 4 to 6 weeks, pain management, emergency room visits when a crisis hit, which could happen any time triggered by cold weather, dehydration, stress, or nothing at all. The average cost ran between $10,000 and $30,000 a year, with insurance manageable. Without insurance, a death sentence wrapped in medical terminology. Renee had no insurance. She worked 2 jobs. Housekeeping at a motel on the Berlin Turnpike. Overnight stocking at a grocery store off Interstate 91. Neither offered benefits. Neither paid enough to cover a single emergency room visit, let alone ongoing transfusions for a 5-year-old whose blood was trying to kill her. So Renee did what desperate mothers do when every legal door closes at the same time. She opened an illegal one. She got a fake ID, then a second one, then a third. She forged pay stubs from a company that did not exist. She filed insurance applications under borrowed Social Security numbers. Over 18 months, she submitted 12 fraudulent claims to get Lyric into treatment at Hartford Hospital, where doctors stabilized her daughter's hemoglobin count, managed her pain, and never once suspected that the insurance cards their front desk photocopied were ghosts made of desperation and a mother's refusal to watch her child die. Then the FBI came. It was a Wednesday night, 11:47. Renee was washing dishes. Lyric was asleep, curled around a stuffed giraffe with one eye missing. 3 knocks at the door. The kind that do not ask permission. 4 agents, badges, vests, voices that filled the tiny apartment like a flood. They spread documents across her kitchen counter while Lyric stirred in bed. They seized 3 fake insurance cards, 2 forged pay stubs, a laptop with 12 fraudulent claims still open in browser tabs, and a folder thick with Lyric's medical records, blood transfusion schedules, pain management charts, emergency room reports dated every 6 weeks for 18 months straight. The evidence of her crime and the evidence of her love sat side by side on the same counter, indistinguishable. Lyric woke up. She sat up in bed, rubbed her eyes, and saw her mother standing in the kitchen with silver cuffs on her wrists. She did not understand. How could she? She was 5. She only knew that strangers were in her home, and her mother's face looked wrong. Mommy Renee did not resist. She did not argue. She did not explain. She just looked at Lyric and whispered, "Mommy will come back, I promise." An agent guided her toward the door. Lyric screamed, the kind of scream that has no words in it, just raw terror pouring out of a child who cannot make sense of what is happening. A neighbor came. Social services was called. Lyric was carried out of the apartment 45 minutes after her mother clutching the one-eyed giraffe so hard the stitching nearly tore. Renee Douglas was not a good criminal. She got caught because she used her real phone number on one of the applications. She left a digital trail a first-year investigator could follow. She kept every receipt, every appointment card, every discharge summary filed neatly in a folder labeled Lyric Medical, as if she expected someone to review her work. She was a desperate mother who had run out of legal options in a system that had never offered her any. The judge gave her 7 years. She served 5 years and 2 months. Model inmate, GED, earned in year 2. Paralegal certification started in year 3. 104 letters written to her daughter. 67 of them were never delivered. Now, to understand the man standing in that parking lot, you have to leave Connecticut behind. You have to travel north to Boston, to the kind of neighborhood where money does not whisper. It speaks full volume. 45-year-old Nathaniel Carter, lived in a penthouse in Back Bay. 4,000 square feet of exposed brick, floor-to-ceiling windows, and silence so deep it echoed. His real estate development firm, Carter Urban Group, had built over 2,000 units of mixed-income housing across New England. His net worth sat somewhere around $80 million, depending on the quarter. He owned 3 tailored suits for every day of the work week, a wine collection that filled an entire climate-controlled room, art on the walls worth more than some of the buildings he had renovated in his 20s. But only one photograph had a frame. It sat on a shelf in his bedroom behind a stack of unread books. A woman, early 30s, dark skin, wide smile, holding a boy on her hip. The boy was 7. He wore a red shirt, 2 sizes too big. His sneakers had holes. His grin was enormous. That woman was Delia Carter, Nathaniel's mother. And by the time Nathaniel turned 12, she was dead. Delia had worked as a cashier at a pharmacy in Dorchester. She stole from the store, not money. Albuterol inhalers, 3 boxes over 2 months. Her son had severe asthma, the kind that sent him to the emergency room twice before he was 6. The kind that closed his throat at night while she sat beside his bed counting his breaths. Inhalers cost $400 without insurance. Delia had no insurance. She had a son who could not breathe. The judge gave her 4 years for $120 worth of medication that kept her child alive. Delia Carter died 14 months into her sentence. Heart failure. The prison medical unit had flagged her condition twice. Both times treatment was delayed due to what the paperwork called scheduling constraints. Nathaniel was 12. He did not get to say goodbye. His grandmother Alma raised him after that. 71 years old, bad knees, a pension that barely covered rent. She worked alterations out of her kitchen and prayed over Nathaniel every night like prayer was the only insurance she could afford. And she told him something he never forgot. The system don't break everybody the same way, baby. Some it breaks fast, some it breaks slow. But it always breaks the ones nobody's watching. Nathaniel carried that sentence through high school, through a scholarship to Boston University, through his first construction job at 19, through his first property deal at 26, through every rung of a ladder he climbed with. Hands that still remembered the texture of thrift store shirts and government cheese. He built an empire tall enough to tower over the poverty that killed his mother. But no amount of money had ever filled the space where she used to stand. In America, 2.7 million children have a parent behind bars right now. Not next year. Right now, those children are 6 times more likely to end up incarcerated themselves. The foster care system processes over 400,000 of them every single year, cycling kids through homes like inventory through a warehouse. Some find stability, most don't. Nathaniel knew those numbers because he had lived inside them. So 8 years ago he founded the Bridge Home Foundation, a nonprofit that partnered with family courts and child welfare agencies to provide transitional support for children of incarcerated parents, housing, tutoring, therapy, medical care. And when the system had nowhere else to put a child, Nathaniel opened his own home. He became a licensed foster parent. He took in 3 children over 6 years, 2 reunified with family. One aged out at 18 with a college fund Nathaniel set up and a standing invitation to Sunday dinner that the kids still accepted twice a month. Then came Lyric. She arrived 2 years before Renee's release transferred after 2 failed placements. The first family returned her after 3 months. They said she screamed in her sleep and nothing they tried could stop it. The second family lasted 5 months until the medical bills from her sickle cell treatments overwhelmed their budget and they called the caseworker with an apology and a suitcase packed by the door. Lyric was 8 years old. She had been in 3 homes in 3 years. She had stopped crying by then, not because the pain was gone, because she had learned that crying did not bring anyone back. Nathaniel saw her file on a Tuesday afternoon. He read it once. Then he read it again. Then he closed his office door and sat in silence for 20 minutes. He saw his mother's name in every line. He saw his own face in every photo. An 8-year-old black child with a sick body and a missing parent and a system that moved her from stranger to stranger like she was a problem to be transferred rather than a person to be loved. He took her home that Friday. And for 2 years, he did what no one had done since Renee was taken. He made sure Lyric was safe. He drove her to Boston Medical Center every 4 weeks for transfusions. He learned which side she parted her hair on. He figured out that she liked her grilled cheese cut diagonal, not straight. He read to her every night. Charlotte's Web. They were on chapter 7. He did not adopt her. He knew her mother was coming home. But now that the day had finally arrived, now that Renee Douglas had walked through those gates and knelt on the asphalt and held a daughter whose eyes looked back over her shoulder, Nathaniel Carter stood beside his Range Rover and felt something he had not expected. Not relief. Not satisfaction that his work was done. Fear. Because Lyric was the 4th child he had fostered, but she was the first one he did not want to give back. The ride from Danbury to Boston was 2 hours and 14 minutes. Renee knew because she counted every one of them. She sat in the passenger seat of Nathaniel's Range Rover with her spine pressed flat against the leather, her hands folded in her lap, her fingers not touching a single surface of the vehicle. Not the armrest, not the door handle, not the climate control that pumped warm air she had not asked for. 5 years of institutional living had taught her body one rule above all others: do not touch what is not yours. Lyric was asleep in the back seat, buckled in, head tilted against the window, Gigi the giraffe tucked under her chin. She had fallen asleep 12 minutes into the drive the way children do when motion and warmth conspire against consciousness. The car was quiet except for the hum of the highway and the soft rhythm of a child breathing. Renee stared at the road ahead. Connecticut disappeared behind them. Massachusetts crept closer. The trees along Interstate 84 were losing their leaves, branches going bare in the October light, like bones showing through skin. She did not look at Nathaniel. She had not looked at him since the parking lot. But she could feel him in the periphery. Calm hands on the steering wheel. 10 and 2. Relaxed, like he drove former inmates and their children home from prison every Tuesday. Renee spoke first. "When can I take her home?" The words came out sharper than she intended. Not a question, a demand wearing the mask of a question. Every syllable carrying the weight of 1,887 days of silence. Nathaniel did not answer immediately. He checked the rearview mirror, looked at Lyric sleeping, then looked back at the road. "You don't have a home yet, Miss Douglas." 6 words. No cruelty in them, no judgment, just fact. The kind of fact that enters the body like a blade, made of truth, and truth cuts deeper than any insult, because you cannot argue with it. You can only bleed. Renee's jaw tightened. Her right hand clenched into a fist so tight the knuckles went pale. She turned her face toward the passenger window and caught her own reflection in the glass. A woman who looked 10 years older than 32, wearing clothes from 2019 that no longer fit a body. Prison had starved and hardened, hollow cheeks, eyes that had forgotten how to soften, hair pulled back in a style no one would choose if they had access to a mirror they trusted. She looked like someone who had been paused. While the world outside kept playing, "The Foundation has a transitional apartment in Roxbury," Nathaniel said, his voice measured careful like a man, placing words on a table one at a time to avoid startling a cornered animal. "Furnished, clean, close to the T. It's designed for women coming out of federal or state facilities. Housing support, job placement resources, access to legal aid. You'd have your own space, no strings. I don't need your charity." She said it without looking at him. Said it the way she had said it to every social worker, every case manager, every well-meaning stranger who had offered help that always came with a hook buried somewhere inside. Nathaniel was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the highway exit for Hartford passed behind them. Long enough that Lyric shifted in her sleep and mumbled something neither of them could hear. Then he said it. "It's not charity. It's what should have existed when my mother came home." A pause, except she never did. Renee turned. For the first time since the parking lot, she looked at Nathaniel Carter. Not at his watch, not at his shoes. Not at the leather steering wheel or the dashboard that probably cost more than her entire legal defense. She looked at his face, and she saw something there that she had not expected. Pain, old and deep, and permanently settled into the lines around his eyes. The kind of pain that money buries but never kills. The kind she recognized because it lived in her own face every time she caught her reflection. She did not say thank you. She did not say sorry. She did not say anything at all. She just turned back to the window and let the silence carry them the rest of the way to Boston. The apartment was on the second floor of a triple-decker on Dudley Street in Roxbury. Brown brick, iron railings. A neighborhood that smelled like jerk chicken from the restaurant on the corner and diesel fumes from the bus route that ran every 20 minutes. The kind of block where people sat on front steps in the evening and called each other by first name, and where nobody asked where you had been if you came back looking like you had been somewhere hard. Inside the apartment was small. 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, a kitchen with a stove, a microwave, and a refrigerator that hummed louder than it should. A couch that had seen better decades. Clean sheets on the bed. Towels folded on the bathroom counter. Soap. Toothbrush. A packet of hair ties. Someone had thought about the details. Someone had imagined a woman walking in here with nothing and had tried to fill the gaps between nothing and enough. On the kitchen table sat a single sheet of paper, typed, organized into columns. Lyric's treatment schedule at Boston Medical Center. Medication names. Dosages. Transfusion dates. Next appointment. Contact number for the hematology department. Emergency protocols for a sickle cell crisis. Renee picked it up and read it twice. Every line was a reminder, not just of her daughter's illness, but of the fact that someone else had been managing it. Someone else had learned the drug names. Someone else had driven Lyric to every appointment for 2 years, while Renee sat in a cell marking days on a wall. Nathaniel had left this for her. He had not mentioned it. He had not pointed to it like a trophy. He had simply placed it on the table and let her find it the way you leave a map for someone entering territory they have never walked. Lyric stood in the doorway of the bedroom. She held Gigi by one leg, the giraffe dangling upside down, its single eye staring at the ceiling. She looked around the apartment with the quiet assessment of a child who had learned to evaluate new spaces quickly. Is this safe? How long will I be here? Where is the exit? Is this where we live now? Lyric asked. For now, Renee said, and hated how uncertain those 2 words sounded. Lyric walked in slowly. She touched the couch, opened the refrigerator, looked inside the bathroom. She did everything with a politeness that bordered on performance, the kind of careful behavior that does not come naturally to a 10-year-old. It comes from training, from learning that good behavior keeps you in a home and bad behavior gets your suitcase packed. Children of incarcerated parents carry a specific kind of wound. Studies call it attachment disruption. Therapists call it complex trauma. What it looks like in practice is a child who does not cry when she should, does not ask for things she needs, does not throw tantrums or make demands, or test boundaries the way healthy children do. Because testing boundaries is a luxury reserved for kids who believe the adults around them will stay. Lyric did not test boundaries. She observed them, memorized them, obeyed them, and kept her real feelings locked behind a door she opened for no one. 5 years, 3 homes, 1 giraffe. Renee sat on the couch and patted the space beside her. Lyric sat down, close but not touching. The distance between them was 6 inches and 5 years wide. Do you remember this apartment? Renee asked. A silly question. Lyric had never been here. No, Lyric said. Then, after a pause, it smells like the second house, the one with the cat. Renee did not know about the cat. She did not know about any of it. The homes, the families, the nights, the details that made up half of Lyric's life were chapters in a book Renee had never been allowed to read. What was the cat's name? Renee asked, because it was the only question she could manage without her voice breaking. Oliver. He was orange. He slept on my bed sometimes. Another pause. They gave him away when they gave me back. Renee's throat closed. She reached for Lyric's hand. The girl let her take it. Small fingers, warm, still, the fingers of a child, but longer now, the baby softness, replaced by something leaner, older. I missed you, Renee whispered. Lyric looked at her. Those brown eyes steady clear, too calm for a 10-year-old. I know, she said. Not I missed you too, just I know. An acknowledgement without reciprocation. The emotional vocabulary of a child who had been disappointed too many times to risk enthusiasm. That night, Lyric stood in the bedroom doorway in pajamas Nathaniel had packed in her bag. Pink flannel, giraffes on them. Someone knew what she liked. Mr. Nathaniel reads to me every night, Lyric said. We're on chapter 7 of Charlotte's Web. Can you read chapter 8? Renee nodded. Of course, baby. Lyric climbed into bed, tucked Gigi under the covers beside her, pulled the blanket to her chin. Renee sat on the edge of the mattress and opened the book Nathaniel had packed alongside the pajamas and the toothbrush and the medications. She turned to chapter 8. The words blurred. She blinked them into focus and began to read, her voice steady, her hands trembling just slightly against the spine of the book. Lyric was asleep by the second page. Renee closed the book, sat in the dark, then opened it again to chapter 1, and read the entire thing from the beginning alone, in the dim light of a borrowed apartment, learning the story her daughter already knew by heart, filling in the gap the only way she could, one page at a time. The first time Renee walked through Boston alone, she felt like a woman visiting a foreign country that used to be her home. Everything had shifted. The coffee shop on the corner took orders through a screen. The bus required a card she did not have. People paid for things by waving their phones over little white boxes. Nobody carried cash. Nobody made eye contact. Everyone moved with a speed and certainty that felt like a language she had forgotten how to speak. She had left the world in 2019. She came back to find it had moved on without leaving instructions. Her probation officer had given her a list. Requirements for maintaining supervised release. Check in weekly. Secure employment within 60 days. Maintain stable housing. Submit to random drug testing. Attend mandatory re-entry counseling sessions. Violate any condition, and the remaining 22 months of her sentence would come back like a door slamming shut. Employment was first. She needed a job. Not just for the probation requirement, but because without income the family court would never consider restoring her parental rights. Nathaniel's lawyer had explained that during the drive, Renee had listened without asking questions, filing the information in the same part of her brain where she had filed her inmate number and her cell assignment, and every other piece of data the system required her to memorize in order to survive. She applied at a hotel in Back Bay. Housekeeping position. 8-hour shifts 4 days a week, $14 an hour. The interview lasted 9 minutes. The hiring manager was a woman in her 40s with a kind face and sensible shoes who asked reasonable questions and seemed genuinely impressed that Renee had earned her GED and started paralegal studies while incarcerated. We value second chances here, the woman said. Renee almost believed her. Then came the background check. 3 days later, her phone rang. The same kind voice, but flatter now. Careful. Practicing a script. Miss Douglas, thank you for your patience. Unfortunately, after reviewing your background screening, we're unable to move forward with your application at this time. It's company policy. Company policy. 2 words that meant we see what you did, and we have decided it defines you forever. The screen had shown everything. Federal conviction. Healthcare fraud. Identity theft. Wire fraud. Sentence 7 years. Served 5 years. 2 months, 14 days. The numbers of her life reduced to a criminal record that loaded faster than her hope. Renee thanked the woman, hung up, sat on the edge of her borrowed bed and stared at the wall for 11 minutes. She did not argue. People who have been inside learn quickly that arguing with a system only gives the system another reason to punish you. You learn to nod. You learn to leave quietly. You learn to save your rage for the dark, where no one can use it against you. In America, 76 out of every 100 people released from prison are arrested again within 5 years. Not because they want to go back, because the world outside is designed to send them back. No housing, no employment, no insurance, no credit, no references, No second chance that actually functions as a second chance rather than a second test designed for failure. Renee walked down Tremont Street, past the churches and the check-cashing places and the corner stores with bulletproof glass at the counter. She turned onto Massachusetts Avenue and kept going past the shelters, past the bus stops, past Boston Medical Center, where her daughter received blood transfusions every 4 weeks, in a building Renee had never set foot inside. And there on the side of the building, a billboard. Bright blue, smiling family, white teeth, big letters. Affordable healthcare for every family. Because no one should go without. Renee stopped. She stood on the sidewalk and stared at that sign. A sign promising the exact thing she had gone to prison trying to get. Affordable healthcare for every family. The irony did not make her laugh. It settled into her stomach like something rotten, something she would carry for a long time. 5 years ago that sign, or one just like it, had been on the same street. And Lyric had been in an emergency room with a sickle cell crisis while Renee filled out a fraudulent insurance application on a borrowed laptop because every family did not include hers. The sign was still here. The gap it promised to close was still open. The only thing that had changed was Renee. She had a felony now, and a clear plastic bag of everything she owned. She walked to the bus stop at the corner of Mass Ave and Albany Street, sat down on the metal bench, opened her wallet. Inside were 3 bills and some coins. She counted them even though she already knew. $47.30. That was the price tag the system had put on 5 years of her life and 5 years of her daughter's childhood. Before the apartment in Roxbury, before the parking lot in Danbury, before the man with the Range Rover and the daughter who looked back over her shoulder, there was the cell, 8 feet by 10 feet. Concrete walls painted the color of nothing. A steel bunk bolted to the floor. A toilet with no lid. A shelf that held 4 books, a toothbrush, a comb, and a stack of lined paper that grew shorter every week because Renee wrote letters the way other inmates counted days, 1 page at a time, 1 word after another, until the wall between her and the world outside felt thin enough to whisper through. She wrote to Lyric every Tuesday. Dear Lyric, today I learned a new word, resilience. Your teacher would probably say it means bouncing back, but I think it means choosing to stand up even when everything inside you wants to lie down. I hope you are standing, baby. I hope someone is helping you stand. She never knew if the letters arrived. The prison mailed them to the foster care agency. The agency was supposed to forward them to whoever had Lyric at the time. But supposed to is the longest lie the system tells, and Renee learned early that sending a letter into that pipeline was like dropping a coin into a well and praying the splash meant someone was listening. She wrote anyway. 104 letters over 5 years. 67 were never delivered. She would not learn that number until after her release, when a caseworker handed her a manila envelope thick with returned mail. 67 letters, stamped undeliverable, or recipient, no longer at this address, or worst of all, simply blank, no stamp, no explanation, just silence in envelope form. But inside that cell, she did not know. So, she kept writing. She marked each day on the wall beside her bunk with a pencil stub she sharpened against the concrete floor. 1,887 marks. Tiny lines, tight rows, scratched into paint that had been scratched by women before her and would be scratched by women after her. A calendar made of desperation. A timeline of absence. Each mark was a day without bedtime stories, without braiding Lyric's hair on Sunday mornings, without hearing her laugh at something ridiculous, without holding her through a sickle cell crisis, her small body rigid with pain, her breath coming in short gasps while Renee counted to 10 and whispered, "I'm here, I'm here, I'm here." She was not there. Not when Lyric lost her first baby tooth and swallowed it by accident and cried because the tooth fairy would not come if there was no tooth under the pillow. Not when Lyric started first grade and walked into a classroom full of children who had mothers waiting outside the door. Not when Lyric woke screaming at 2 in the morning in a stranger's house, calling for a woman 200 miles away behind a locked steel door. Renee was not there for any of it. But she was not idle. She earned her GED in year 2, scored in the 93rd percentile on the math section and the 88th on reading comprehension. She started paralegal studies in year 3 through a correspondence program partnered with the University of Connecticut. She studied case law at night, contract language, constitutional amendments. The legal architecture of the system that had swallowed her examined from the inside like a prisoner mapping the blueprints of her own cage. She did it because learning was the only thing left that no one could take. They took her daughter. They took her name and gave her a number. They took her clothes and gave her khaki. They took her time and gave her a schedule written by someone who would never meet her. But they could not take the words she put on paper or the knowledge she built sentence by sentence in a cell that smelled like bleach and regret. In year 4, she received a letter from the foster care agency. Standard update, 2 paragraphs, typed. Lyric Douglas has been placed with a new foster family in the Boston area. Her care provider, Mr. Nathaniel Carter, is a licensed foster parent affiliated with the Bridge Home Foundation. That was it. No photo, no phone number. No explanation of who Nathaniel Carter was, or why he lived in Boston, or how a man with a foundation had come to hold her daughter. Just a name she had never heard. Attached to a child she could not reach. Renee folded the letter, put it under her pillow, and that night, for the first time in 3 years, she did not write to Lyric. She lay on her bunk staring at the ceiling and whispered the name into the dark. Nathaniel Carter, a stranger with her daughter. Again, the third one. She closed her eyes. She counted to 10. And she waited for morning. That night, Nathaniel Carter sat alone in the office of the Bridge Home Foundation on Washington Street. The building was quiet. Staff had gone home hours ago. The hallway lights were off. Only the lamp on his desk cast a warm circle across papers and photographs and the cold remains of a coffee he had poured at 6 and never finished. The walls of his office were covered in pictures, dozens of them. Children he had helped place, families he had helped reunite, mothers at graduation ceremonies for re-entry programs, kids on first days of school wearing backpacks the foundation had paid for. Each photograph was a small victory against a system that produced far more losses than wins. But Nathaniel was not looking at any of those. He was looking at one photograph, taped to the corner of his computer monitor. Lyric, 8 years old, the day she arrived. Missing a front tooth. Grinning so wide you could see her molars. Gigi the giraffe tucked under her arm, one-eyed and worn soft from years of being held by hands that had no one else to hold. She had been terrified that first night. He did not know that until 3 in the morning when the screaming started. He had run to her room and found her on the floor tangled in the sheets, eyes open but seeing something that was not there. He had tried to hold her. She fought him. He had tried to talk. She could not hear him. He sat on the floor beside her and counted to 10 because it was the only thing his body remembered from the breathing exercises his grandmother had taught him 40 years ago. It had taken 6 months to figure out that counting worked. 6 months of guessing. 6 months of failing. Now he sat in his office and stared at that photograph and felt something tearing quietly inside his chest. Not a dramatic rupture, not a breakdown. Just the slow, private grief of a man who knew what he had to do and did not want to do it. He knew the law. He had studied it the way generals study terrain before battle. Renee Douglas had a federal conviction. No stable employment, no independent housing, no savings. A parole officer she had to report to every week. Under Massachusetts family court standards, a judge would look at those facts and deny her petition for custody. Not out of cruelty, out of protocol. The system did not ask whether a mother loved her child. It asked whether a mother could prove on paper that she met a checklist designed by people who had never lost anything. Nathaniel could keep Lyric. Legally, ethically, practically. He had the resources, the track record, the stable home. No judge would take a thriving child from a licensed foster parent with an $80 million net worth and hand her to a woman who had been released from federal prison 6 weeks ago with $47 in her pocket. He could keep her, but he could not keep her and live with himself. Because every time he looked at Lyric, he saw his own face at 12 years old, standing at a graveside in Dorchester, staring at a casket that held the only person who had ever made him feel safe, thinking the one thought that had haunted him for 33 years. If somebody had helped her, if somebody had opened a door instead of closing one, if somebody had treated Delia Carter like a human being instead of a case number, she might have come home. She might have watched him graduate. She might have met Lyric. His grandmother's voice echoed in the silence. The system don't break everybody the same way, baby. Some it breaks fast, some it breaks slow, but it always breaks the ones nobody's watching. Nathaniel had been watching. For 2 years he had been watching Renee through her letters. Every letter she wrote to Lyric passed through the foster care system, and every letter that reached his home he read, not to spy, not to judge, but because he needed to understand the woman on the other side of those walls. 104 letters. He had read every one that arrived. The early ones were raw, desperate, full of promises that sounded more like prayers. But over the years, the voice in those letters changed. It grew steadier, more precise, more educated. He watched Renee Douglas teach herself through the pages she sent her daughter. Vocabulary words, legal terms, definitions of resilience, definitions of grace. The handwriting grew neater. The thoughts grew clearer. The woman behind the words was not dissolving in that cell. She was rebuilding, and Nathaniel knew from reading those letters that Renee would not accept help that looked like pity. She would rather lose than be saved. She would rather fail on her own terms than succeed on someone else's, which is why he had not told her. 3 weeks ago, he had contacted Claudia Whitfield, a pro bono attorney who specialized in reentry cases and parental rights restoration. He had sent her Renee's prison records, her GED transcript, her paralegal coursework, her disciplinary file, which was clean, her letters, the ones that showed a woman who had used 5 years not to waste away but to prepare for a moment she was not sure would come. Claudia had filed the initial petition, Restoration of Parental Rights, on behalf of Renee Douglas, funded by the Bridge Home Foundation. Nathaniel had signed the authorization and told no one, not because he wanted control, but because he knew that without legal representation Renee's case would sit in a backlog for 18 months, and by the time a judge reviewed it, the window for reunification would have narrowed to almost nothing. He had seen it happen before. Mothers who did everything right and still lost because the system moved slower than their children grew. He reached across his desk and picked up the framed photograph of his mother, Delia, 32 years old in the picture, younger than Renee was now, holding a boy in a red shirt who did not yet know he would lose her in 5 years. "I couldn't save you, Mama." His voice was barely a whisper. "But maybe I can do this one thing right." He set the photograph down. Maybe. The first week, 3 applications. The second week, 7. By the third week, Renee had applied to 19 jobs across Boston: housekeeping, dishwashing, stocking shelves, laundry services, janitorial work. Anything that did not require a degree, a license, or a clean record. 14 never responded. 4 said no after the background check. 1 said maybe, then stopped returning her calls. In the United States, 75% of employers run criminal background checks on applicants. 60% automatically disqualify anyone with a felony conviction. Some states have passed fair chance hiring laws that push the background check later in the process. Massachusetts was one of them. But moving the question to a later stage did not change the answer. It just delayed the rejection. Renee learned the rhythm. Apply, interview, smile, answer questions about reliability and work ethic and goals. Watch the hiring manager nod. Feel a flicker of something almost like hope. Then, wait 3 to 5 business days for the phone call that always began the same way. Unfortunately, after reviewing your background. Unfortunately, the most dishonest word in the English language when spoken by someone who was never going to say yes. Then she found Odessa Whitmore. Odessa ran a laundromat on Dorchester Avenue. A narrow storefront wedged between a barbershop and a bodega, with 6 washers, 4 dryers, and a hand-painted sign that read, "Odessa's Clean Start," in letters that had faded from blue to something closer to gray. 68 years old. Bad hip. Bifocals on a beaded chain around her neck. Hands that had folded more sheets than she could count, and buried a husband who had done 12 years at MCI Shirley for a robbery he committed at 23 and regretted every day until the cancer took him at 59. Odessa did not ask for a resume. She did not ask where Renee had been. She asked one question. "Can you fold?" Renee nodded. "Then you start Monday. $12 an hour. Cash. I don't do paperwork, and I don't do drama. You show up, you work, you go home." She could fold. She had been folding clothes herself, her expectations, for 5 years. The job was small. The hours were long. The pay was barely enough to cover bus fare and groceries, and the $50 weekly contribution Renee insisted on sending to Nathaniel for Lyric's medical expenses. Nathaniel did not need that money. His net worth could cover Lyric's sickle cell treatments for the next 300 years without noticing. But he understood what that $50 meant. It was not a payment. It was proof. Proof that Renee was still Lyric's mother, even if the system said otherwise. Proof that she could provide even if the amount was small enough to fit in an envelope. He never refused it. Every week he took the cash Renee handed him in the lobby of the Bridge Home Foundation and deposited it into a savings account he had opened in Lyric's name. He never told Renee about the account. He figured someday when the time was right, she would find it, and she would understand. One evening after closing, Odessa locked the front door and handed Renee a cup of coffee in a mug that said "World's Okayest Grandma." "You ain't the first woman to walk out of those gates and feel like the world don't got a seat for you no more," Odessa said, settling into the plastic chair behind the counter with the slow deliberation of a woman whose body had earned every ache it carried. "But baby, you build your own chair. You hear me? You don't wait for somebody to pull one out for you. You build it, board by board, nail by nail, and when it's done you sit in it like you own the room." Renee sipped the coffee. It was too strong and slightly burned. It was the best thing she had tasted in weeks. The 7th overnight visit started like the others. Lyric arrived with her backpack and Gigi and the careful politeness of a child who had been taught by experience to keep her expectations low. She ate the dinner Renee cooked. Spaghetti with sauce from a jar, because Renee had not yet relearned how to cook anything more complicated. She brushed her teeth. She changed into her giraffe pajamas. She climbed into bed and asked for Chapter 11 of Charlotte's Web. Renee read it. Her voice was steadier now than the first night. She had practiced. She had read ahead so she would know the words before they came, so her voice would not stumble, so she would sound like a mother who had always been there, instead of one who was learning the story 7 chapters too late. Lyric fell asleep. On page 3, Renee closed the book, kissed her forehead, turned off the lamp. At 2:13 in the morning, the screaming started. It came from somewhere deep, not the throat, somewhere lower, somewhere older, a place in the body where terror lives when it has no language. Lyric was sitting upright in bed, eyes open, seeing nothing that was in the room. Her hands were pressed flat against the wall behind her fingers clawing at the paint, and her mouth was open, and the sound coming out of it was not a word. It was a siren. A child's siren, the kind that means danger, is inside me, and I cannot get it out. "Don't take me," Lyric screamed. "Don't take me again. I'll be good. I'll be good." Renee was at the bedside in 3 seconds. She reached for her daughter, pulled her close, held her the way she had held her 1,000 times in her mind, over 5 years tight, complete a wall between her child and every terrible thing in the world. Lyric pushed her away. Not gently, with force. The frantic strength of a child trapped inside a memory that does not know the present tense. Renee tried again. Lyric kicked, screamed louder. Her body rigid, vibrating like a wire, pulled so tight it hums before it snaps. Children who grow up with an incarcerated parent often develop symptoms that mirror post-traumatic stress. Night terrors, hypervigilance, attachment disruption so severe that the child cannot distinguish between comfort and threat. The body learns to interpret all contact as potential loss. Every hand that reaches for them might be the hand that takes them somewhere new. Every door that opens might be the door that separates them from whoever they have just begun to trust. Lyric was deep inside that place, the place where every foster home transfer lived, the place where her mother's arrest replayed on a loop, the place where she was always 5 years old and always being carried away from something and never toward anything. Renee stopped reaching. She sat down on the floor beside the bed. She did not touch Lyric. She did not sing. She placed her hand palm up on the mattress next to her daughter's trembling fist. And she repeated the only words she had. "I'm here. I'm not leaving. I'm here." Over and over, like a heartbeat made of words. Minutes passed. 5, maybe 10. The screaming softened to whimpering. The whimpering softened to breath. Lyric's hand slowly, so slowly it barely moved, uncurled and found her mother's palm. Then Lyric whispered, "Mr. Nathaniel holds my hand and counts to 10. That's what makes it stop." Something inside Renee cracked. Not broke, cracked. The way a window cracks when a stone hits it, but the glass holds together, fractured and still standing. She swallowed, squeezed her daughter's fingers, and began to count. 1. Steady. 2. Quieter. 3. Slower. 4. Lyric's breathing evened. 5. Her grip loosened. 6. Her eyelids flickered. 7. Her body sank deeper into the mattress. 8. 9. Almost inaudible. 10. Lyric was asleep. Renee did not move. She sat on the floor in the dark, her hand still holding her daughter's, and wept, silently. The kind of crying that makes no sound because the grief is too deep for noise. She did not cry because Lyric was in pain. She cried because someone else had learned her daughter's pain before she did. Someone else had figured out the counting. Someone else had sat through those nights and earned that trust one terrified hour at a time. While Renee marked days on a concrete wall 200 miles away. By morning the tears had dried. But the question had not. She picked up her phone, scrolled to a contact she had never dialed. Pressed call. Nathaniel answered on the second ring. "Miss Douglas." "The counting thing," Renee said. "No greeting. No preamble. When did you figure that out?" A pause. Long. The kind of silence that holds more truth than most sentences. "Month 6, Nathaniel said quietly. "After a lot of nights, I didn't know what I was doing either." Renee closed her eyes. For the first time since she had walked out of that prison gate, she heard Nathaniel Carter not as the man who had her daughter, but as a person who had been just as lost as she was, just as scared, just as desperate to get it right. Neither of them said anything else. The call ended after 11 seconds of silence that said more than an hour of conversation ever could. Renee found out on a Wednesday. She was sitting in the plastic chair across from her probation officer, a woman named Janet Colvin, who wore reading glasses on a lanyard and spoke with the careful neutrality of someone trained never to give an opinion about anything. Standard check-in, employment verification, housing status, compliance with re-entry program requirements. The same questions every week, the same answers. Then Janet opened a folder, a new folder, thicker than the usual one. "I want to go over something with you," Janet said. She turned the folder around and slid it across the desk. Renee looked down. The first page was a cover letter on legal letterhead, "Claudia Whitfield, attorney at law, specializing in family reunification and parental rights restoration, pro bono representation." Below it in clean black type, the words that rearranged everything. "Petition for restoration of parental rights, filed on behalf of Renee Elaine Douglas, case number 2024-7713. Funded by the Bridge Home Foundation." Renee turned the page. And there it was. At the bottom, in ink, the signature of Nathaniel Carter. Authorization to fund legal representation. Authorization to submit. Renee's prison education records, her GED transcript, her paralegal coursework, her clean disciplinary file, her employment verification from Odessa's laundromat, her housing confirmation at the Bridge Home. Transitional apartment. All of it compiled. organized, filed with the Suffolk County Family Court 3 weeks ago. Without her knowledge, without her permission, without a single word. Renee stared at the signature. Her jaw tightened, her hands pressed flat against the desk, fingers spread like she was bracing against something only she could feel. She read the document twice, 3 times, each time the same name at the bottom, Nathaniel Carter. She did not thank Janet. She did not ask questions. She stood up, took the folder, and walked out of the office. 22 minutes later, she was standing in the lobby of the Bridge Home Foundation on Washington Street. The receptionist tried to stop her. Renee walked past without slowing down. She pushed open the door to Nathaniel's office and placed the folder on his desk like a woman laying down a weapon. "You went behind my back." Her voice was low, controlled. The kind of anger that does not shout because shouting would give it somewhere to escape, and Renee wanted every word to land exactly where she aimed it. Nathaniel looked at the folder, then at Renee. He did not stand. He did not apologize. He did not explain. "I went behind bureaucracy's back," he said. "There's a difference." "Is there?" Renee leaned forward, both palms on his desk, now her weight pressing into the wood. "You decided what I need. You decided how to fix my life. You filed papers with my name on them in a court I have to face, and you didn't think I deserved to know. I thought you deserved representation. You thought I couldn't handle it myself." The room went still. Nathaniel's hands rested on the arms of his chair. He looked at Renee with an expression that was not guilt and was not defiance. It was recognition. The kind of recognition that happens when someone holds up a mirror and you see something you have been trying not to look at. "Do you know who else made decisions about my life without asking me?" Renee said. Her voice cracked on the last word but held. "The judge who took my daughter. The system that locked me up. The caseworkers who moved Lyric from home to home like she was furniture that didn't fit. And now you. A man who thinks because he has money and good intentions he gets to skip the part where he asks." Nathaniel opened his mouth, then closed it. Because she was right, and he knew she was right. And the reason she was right was the reason he had done it in the first place. He was a man who solved problems. It was what he did. He saw a broken thing, and he fixed it. He saw a gap, and he filled it. He had built an $80 million empire on the principle that resources plus action equals results. And he had applied that same equation to Renee Douglas, without once considering that Renee Douglas was not a problem to be solved. She was a woman who had already been solved, categorized, sentenced, filed, stored, released. She had spent 5 years inside a system that made every decision for her: when to eat, when to sleep, when to speak, when to be silent. And now, on the other side of those walls, the first man she had trusted enough to let near her daughter had done the same thing the system had done, decided for her, without asking. "It's not the same," Nathaniel said, but his voice lacked conviction. It was the voice of a man testing his own argument and finding it thin. "It's exactly the same," Renee said. "The only difference is you think you're doing it out of kindness. But kindness that takes away someone's choice isn't kindness, Mr. Carter. It's control with better lighting." She picked up the folder, held it at her side. "I don't need you to save me. I need you to let me save myself. And if you can't tell the difference, then maybe you don't understand this work as well as you think you do." She turned, walked to the door, opened it. The door closed, and neither of them knew how to open it again. 2 weeks passed. Renee did not call Nathaniel. She did not visit the Bridge Home Foundation. She did not respond to the 2 voicemails he left, both short, both careful, both ending with the same sentence: "Lyric asks about you every day." She worked double shifts at Odessa's laundromat, 6 in the morning until 2, then back at 4 until close. 14 hours of folding and sorting and loading and unloading, her hands raw from detergent, her back aching from the industrial press, her mind running the same calculation over and over. A private attorney for a parental rights case cost between $3,000 and $8,000. At $12 an hour, she would need to work 400 hours to reach the low end. That was 50 days of double shifts. She could do it. She would do it. She would get her own lawyer and file her own petition and owe Nathaniel Carter nothing. But while she was calculating, the system was counting too. She missed the third session of her court-mandated parenting class, then the fourth. The class met on Tuesday evenings at 6:30 at a community center in Jamaica Plain. Her second shift started at 4. She could not be in two places at once, and the system did not care why. Janet Colvin, her probation officer, called on a Thursday morning. The voice was the same, careful, neutral, it always was, but the words were not. "Miss Douglas, you've missed 2 consecutive parenting education sessions. Under the terms of your supervised release and the pending custody evaluation, failure to complete the required program within 60 days will result in a reduction of visitation privileges and a minimum 12-month delay on any petition for restoration of parental rights." 60 days, 12 months. The numbers landed like stones dropped into still water. Lyric's overnight visits were suspended, effective immediately, pending completion of the program requirements. That night, Renee sat in the apartment on Dudley Street, the apartment Nathaniel had arranged, the apartment she had refused to leave because leaving would mean admitting she had nowhere else to go. The kitchen light buzzed, the refrigerator hummed, the couch sagged in the middle where she always sat. The place smelled like laundry detergent because the smell had seeped into her skin and she carried it everywhere, now a perfume made of other people's clothes. On the table were 3 letters, new ones, written in pencil on lined notebook paper, the kind with the wide spacing for children still learning to control the size of their words. Lyric had written them over the past 2 weeks and given them to Nathaniel to deliver. He had slid them under Renee's door. She had not opened them until tonight. The first one said, "Dear Mama, I drew a picture of us at school. Mrs. Patterson said it was good. I gave you curly hair because I can't remember if your hair is curly or straight. Is it curly, love, Lyric?" The second one said, "Dear Mama, I got an A on my spelling test." Mr. Nathaniel put it on the fridge. "I saved you a copy. It's in the envelope, but I think it fell out. Sorry. Love, Lyric." The third one said, "Mama, are you coming back? Mr. Nathaniel says you are. But people always say that. People always say that." 5 words from a 10-year-old girl who had been promised things by adults her entire life and watched every promise dissolve like sugar in rain. Foster parents who said, "This is your home now," and then packed her bag 3 months later. Social workers who said, "We're finding the best place for you," and then moved her to a stranger's house. A mother who knelt in a parking lot 5 years ago and whispered, "Mommy will come back. I promise." People always say that. Renee heard her own voice. 5 years ago. Handcuffs on her wrists. Lyric screaming in the background. "Mommy will come back. I promise." And now her daughter, the one person she had endured 5 years for, was writing those words back to her, not as comfort, as evidence. Evidence that promises from adults were a currency that had been devalued so many times it no longer bought anything. Renee put the letter down. Her hands were shaking, not from anger, from the kind of clarity that arrives only when you have hit something solid at the bottom and there is nowhere left to fall. She looked at her phone. Nathaniel's number. The contact she had not dialed since the morning after the night terrors, the morning she had asked about the counting. She did not call because she forgave him. She did not call because she understood. She did not call because pride had left her body or because anger had run its course. She called because of Lyric. It was never about pride. It was never about her. It was about Lyric. And Lyric could not afford another adult who chose their own pain over her needs. The phone rang twice. "Miss Douglas, I need help," Renee said. 3 words that tasted like gravel and sounded like the bravest sentence she had ever spoken. "And I'm asking this time." Renee arrived at the Bridge Home Foundation at 8:47 that evening. The building was dark, except for the light in Nathaniel's office. The same light that was always on, the same desk, the same photographs on the walls. But tonight, Renee noticed something she had not seen before. On the shelf behind Nathaniel's chair, partially hidden by a stack of files, was a framed photograph, small, old, The colors faded to that particular warmth that only film from the 1980s produces. A woman young, maybe 30 or 31, holding a boy on her hip. She wore a white blouse with a stain near the collar. Her smile was wide and unguarded. The boy wore a red shirt too big for him, and sneakers with holes at the toes. His grin stretched ear to ear. Renee stared at it. She had been in this office before. She had sat in that chair. She had looked at those walls. But she had never looked behind Nathaniel. She had never looked at what he kept closest. "That's her," Nathaniel said. He was sitting at his desk. He had not stood when she walked in. His voice was quiet, not the controlled quiet of their first meeting. A different quiet. The quiet of a man who had been sitting alone in a room with a photograph for a very long time. "Your mother, Delia Carter." He said her name like it was something precious he kept in a box and only took out when no one was watching. Renee sat down, not across the desk, in the chair beside him, the one usually reserved for staff meetings and case reviews. She sat down and she waited. Nathaniel looked at the photograph. Then he spoke. "She stole albuterol inhalers. 3 boxes. Albuterol, the same medication that now costs $3 with insurance and $400 without. A bronchodilator used to treat asthma. Available at every pharmacy in America, behind a counter that might as well be a wall if you cannot afford what is on the other side. They gave her 4 years. 4 years. For $120 worth of medication that kept her son breathing through the night. $120. The price of a restaurant dinner for 2 in Back Bay. The price of a pair of shoes at the outlet mall. The price that the state of Massachusetts decided was worth more than a mother's freedom. She died 14 months in. Heart failure. The prison medical unit had flagged her condition twice. Both times the request for a cardiology referral was delayed. The official reason listed in the medical report was scheduling constraints. Scheduling constraints. 2 words that meant her heart was failing, but we did not have time to save it. He was 12. He didn't get to say goodbye. That sentence sat in the air between them. It did not need commentary. It did not need context. It was complete, and it was devastating, and it was the kind of truth that has no expiration date. Every year in America, roughly 4,000 people die inside prisons and jails. Chronic illness is the leading cause. Heart disease, cancer, liver disease, respiratory failure. The mortality rate for incarcerated individuals is 3 times higher than for people of the same age, same race, same health conditions, living outside those walls. Not because prisons create illness, because prisons ignore it. Because the system that decides when you eat and when you sleep and when you see sunlight also decides when and whether you receive medical care. And that decision, more often than not, comes too late. Delia Carter was one of 4,000. Her name was not in any headline. Her death did not trend. Her son did not get a caseworker who explained why his mother was not coming home. He got a phone call from his grandmother at 11 o'clock on a school night. He got a funeral he could not afford. He got a hole in his life, shaped exactly like the woman in that photograph. And he spent the next 33 years building an empire around that hole, hoping that if he made it big enough, tall enough, loud enough, the emptiness at the center would somehow stop echoing. It never did. Nathaniel looked at Renee for the first time since she had sat down. "When I read your file," he said, "your real file, not the court documents, not the sentencing transcript, the one with the medical records and the insurance claims and the letters you wrote to Lyric from your cell, I saw her. I saw my mother. Same crime, same reason, same system." He paused. "The only difference, you survived it." Renee did not cry. She had expected to. She had walked into this building expecting that whatever Nathaniel told her would break something open, and the tears would come, and the tension would dissolve into something manageable. But that is not what happened. What happened was simpler and harder. She sat beside him, in silence. 2 people who had been broken by the same machine, separated by 30 years and a few hundred miles, and the blind luck that one of them got out alive and one of them did not. "I'm sorry about your mother," Renee said. "I'm sorry about your 5 years," Nathaniel said. 2 sentences, nothing more, nothing less. The kind of exchange that does not need decoration because the weight is already there, built into every word by everything that came before it. If this story is reaching you, take a second to subscribe. These stories need to be told. Now, let's continue. Renee did not leave the office that night. Not for another hour. They talked. Not about custody. Not about lawyers or petitions or court dates. They talked about Delia. They talked about Hartford. They talked about the sound a cell door makes when it locks at night, and how you never quite stop hearing it even years later, even in a penthouse in Back Bay, even in a borrowed apartment in Roxbury. And when Renee finally stood to leave, she paused at the door and looked back at the photograph of Delia Carter holding her son in a red shirt. "She would be proud of you," Renee said. Nathaniel shook his head. "She'd tell me I was too stubborn and too bossy, and that my suits cost too much." For the first time in this story, they both smiled. The following Saturday, Renee cooked dinner. This was not a small thing. She had not cooked a real meal in over 5 years. Prison food came on trays, microwaved, portioned by someone who had never asked what she liked. Since her release, she had survived on instant noodles, canned soup, and whatever Odessa sent home with her after closing, usually a sandwich wrapped in wax paper and a piece of fruit that was one day past its best, but still good enough. Tonight, she made macaroni and cheese, from a box, the kind with the powdered orange packet that costs $1.19 at the corner store on Dudley Street. It was the only thing she knew Lyric still liked from before. 5 years ago, Saturday nights were mac and cheese nights. Lyric would stand on a step stool and stir the pot, while Renee told her stories about the macaroni going on adventures inside the boiling water. Lyric always laughed. She always wanted more cheese. Renee did not know if Lyric still laughed at those stories. She did not know if Lyric remembered them at all. But she made the mac and cheese anyway, because some rituals are not about memory. They are about trying. Nathaniel arrived at 6. He knocked, which surprised Renee. It was the first time he had knocked on a door he technically controlled the lease for. He stood in the hallway holding a copy of Charlotte's Web with a bookmark at chapter 12 and a paper bag with 2 bottles of apple juice. Lyric was already inside. She had arrived an hour earlier with a caseworker per the reinstated visitation schedule that Renee and Nathaniel had petitioned together to restore. The caseworker had stayed 15 minutes, taken notes, and left. Lyric sat at the table. Renee stood at the stove. Nathaniel placed the book and the juice on the counter and pulled out the 3rd chair. It was the first time all 3 of them had been in the same room, with no caseworker, no probation officer, no court schedule dictating the terms. Just a kitchen, a pot of macaroni, a book about a pig and a spider. 2 adults who had spent weeks hurting each other, and 1 child who had spent a lifetime being the reason adults either came together or fell apart. Lyric watched them, her brown eyes moving between the 2 like a metronome. She ate her macaroni slowly. She drank her apple juice. She said nothing for a long time. Then she asked, "Am I going to have to pick?" 5 words, spoken with the calm precision of a child who had been asking that question in her head for years, but had never been brave enough to say it out loud. Because in the foster system, you always pick. You pick which parent gets your loyalty. You pick which home you call real. You pick which adult you let close and which one you keep at arm's length so it hurts less when they leave. Lyric had been picking since she was 5, and she was tired. Renee looked at Nathaniel. Nathaniel looked at Renee. Whatever had passed between them in that office 2 nights ago, whatever truce had been built from shared grief and parallel scars, it held. It held in the look they exchanged across a kitchen table covered in a paper towel because Renee did not own a tablecloth. Renee knelt beside her daughter's chair, eye level, the way she had knelt in the parking lot at Danbury. But this time her knees did not shake. "No, baby, you don't pick." Nathaniel leaned forward, his elbows on the table, his voice low and steady. "You got both of us. That's how it works now." Lyric looked at her mother, then at Nathaniel, then back at her mother, searching for the crack, searching for the lie. Searching for the part where this fell apart like everything else had. Promise. That word. That single, loaded, fragile word that had followed Renee across 5 years through prison walls, across state lines, into a parking lot and a borrowed apartment and a dark bedroom where she counted to 10 while her daughter screamed. "Mommy will come back, I promise." Renee had said that once, and she had kept it, barely, imperfectly, 5 years too late, but she had kept it. Now the word came back again, from Lyric's mouth, aimed at both of them. And Renee knew that this time the promise could not be hers alone. She looked at Nathaniel. He looked back. And at the exact same moment, like two people who had rehearsed something they had never discussed, they both answered, "Promise." Lyric stared at them for 3 full seconds. Then something shifted in her face. Not a smile, not yet. Something quieter, something underneath. The first loosening of a knot that had been tied so long she had forgotten it was there. She reached across the table and picked up Gigi, the one-eyed giraffe, threadbare and lopsided and held together by love and stubborn stitching. She placed Gigi in the center of the table between Renee's plate and Nathaniel's glass propped upright against the salt shaker. "Gigi can sit in the middle," Lyric said, "so she can see both of you." Nobody moved. Nobody needed to. The giraffe sat in the center of a kitchen table in Roxbury, one glass eye staring out at a room where 3 people who had been broken by the same system chose for the first time to hold the pieces together instead of fighting over who got to pick them up. 3 weeks later, Renee completed her parenting education program, all 26 sessions. She attended every one on Tuesday evenings after Odessa rearranged her shift schedule without being asked. "Go learn how to be a mama," Odessa had said. "The dryers ain't going nowhere." By month 2, Renee had started weekly therapy sessions at a community mental health center on Blue Hill Avenue. The therapist was a woman named Dr. Paulette Greer, 54 years old, who had spent 20 years working with formerly incarcerated women, and who did not flinch when Renee sat in silence for the first 3 sessions, because she had spent 5 years in a place where proved sharing your feelings was a vulnerability you could not afford. By month 3, Renee spoke, and once she started, the words came like water through a cracked dam, slowly at first. Then, all at once, by month 4, something shifted. Odessa mentioned to a colleague at a community meeting that she knew a woman with a paralegal background and first-hand experience in the reentry system who was looking for work. That colleague worked at the Bridge Home Foundation. Renee applied. Not because Nathaniel offered. He did not. He had learned painfully and precisely that offering Renee things she had not asked for was the fastest way to lose her trust. She filled out the application on a Wednesday afternoon at the public library on Dudley Street. She listed her qualifications, GED earned inside, paralegal certification pending, 147 job applications submitted since release, 1 hired, 26 parenting class sessions completed, 12 therapy sessions attended, 0 violations. She interviewed with the Foundation's program director, a woman who had never met Nathaniel personally and who evaluated Renee's file the same way she evaluated every candidate, on merit, on experience, on the quiet, unmistakable authority that lives in the voice of someone who has walked through a system and come out the other side knowing exactly where the cracks are. Renee was hired as a peer support specialist. Her job was to do for other women what no one had done for Delia Carter 30 years ago. Meet them at the gate, help them find housing, walk them through the paperwork, sit with them in waiting rooms, answer the phone at 2 in the morning when the walls of a borrowed apartment started closing in. Research shows that comprehensive reentry programs, the kind that combine stable housing with employment support, mental health services, and legal aid, can reduce recidivism rates from 76% down to 30%. Not because they make people different, because they make the world outside the gate survivable. Renee moved into a larger apartment. Still Roxbury, still modest. A 2-bedroom on Waverly Street with a kitchen big enough to actually cook in and a window in Lyric's room that looked out onto a community garden where somebody had planted sunflowers that grew taller than the fence. Lyric's room. Those two words carried more weight than anything written in any legal document. Lyric's room had purple walls because Lyric chose the color. A bookshelf with Charlotte's Web and 6 other books Nathaniel had given her over 2 years. A desk where she did homework. And on the wall above the bed a drawing. 3 figures, crayon on construction paper. A tall woman with curly hair. A tall man in a blue jacket. A smaller girl between them holding something yellow and spotted. Underneath, in careful 10-year-old handwriting, Mama, Mr. Nathaniel and me. And next to the girl, 4-legged and smiling with one eye, Gigi. 6 months after Renee Douglas walked through the gates at Danbury, she stood in Suffolk County Family Court. Room 412. Judge Patricia Calloway presiding. Claudia Whitfield, the attorney Nathaniel had originally hired, and Renee had eventually agreed to keep, presented the petition for restoration of parental rights. The file was thick. Employment verification, housing inspection report, therapy attendance records, parenting class completion certificate, letters of support from Odessa Whitmore from Dr. Greer, from Lyric's school counselor, from the Bridge Home Foundation's program director. And at the bottom, a letter from Nathaniel Carter, foster parent of record, formally supporting the transfer of custody to the child's biological mother. The judge read the file. She took her time. She turned pages slowly, the way judges do when they want you to know that the weight of your life is being measured carefully. Then she looked up. "Miss Douglas, the court recognizes your efforts." Renee stood straight, shoulders back, chin level. She did not cry. She did not thank the judge. She did not collapse into the relief that pressed against her chest like a wave trying to break through a seawall. She nodded. The nod of a woman who had earned every inch of this moment, who had folded laundry and written letters and counted to 10 in the dark and swallowed her pride and asked for help and showed up every single day to a world that had given her every reason not to. Outside the courthouse, on the granite steps that faced the Boston skyline, Lyric ran to Renee and wrapped her arms around her waist and held on, not carefully, not politely, the way a child holds on when she finally believes the person she is holding is going to stay. Nathaniel stood 10 feet away, hands in his pockets, watching, the way he had watched from a distance for 2 years, making sure Lyric was safe, making sure the system did not swallow another child the way it had swallowed him. Renee looked at him over Lyric's head. "Get over here." Nathaniel Carter smiled. The first time in this entire story that his face made that shape. Not a polite smile, not a professional smile. The smile of a man who had spent 33 years carrying a grief that finally for one moment felt lighter than it had the day before. The 3 of them stood on the courthouse steps. A formerly incarcerated mother, a man who had been that child once, and a 10-year-old girl who had finally stopped waiting. 1 year later, on a Tuesday morning in October, Renee Douglas stood outside the gates of Federal Correctional Institution Danbury. The same gate, the same cracked parking lot, the same chain-link fence lined with dead ivy, the same 2-lane road leading to a town that did not know the names of the women who passed through those walls. But Renee was not walking out. She was standing at the gate, waiting, holding the hand of a 4-year-old boy named Josiah, whose mother was scheduled for release at 9:15. Josiah wore a green jacket and new sneakers and clutched a stuffed bear that Renee had bought at the dollar store on Dudley Street 2 days ago because she remembered what it felt like to walk out of those gates and see your child holding something you did not give them. She did not have a Range Rover. She did not have an $80 million net worth. She did not have a foundation with her name on it. She had something Nathaniel himself would tell you was worth more. The understanding that comes only from having lived it. The knowledge of what that gate looks like from both sides. The ability to say to a woman walking out with a clear plastic bag and $47, "I know. I was here too. And I'm going to help you find your way back." The system that took Renee's freedom had also accidentally given her a purpose. Nathaniel had spent 30 years trying to save his mother. He could not. Delia Carter died in a cell 14 months into a sentence for stealing medication that cost less than a pair of shoes. But in helping Renee, Nathaniel had saved the version of himself that had been standing at a gate just like this one, 12 years old, waiting for a mother who never came. He could not change the past, but he could change who was waiting at the gate when the next mother walked through. A single mother walked out of a federal prison after 5 years. Her daughter was waiting, with a stranger. But the stranger was not really a stranger. He was the boy who had been standing at that same gate 30 years before. And this time, the story ended differently. Not perfectly, not like a fairy tale, not with a mansion or $1 million or a miracle that erased the years. It ended with a woman holding a child's hand in a parking lot, with a borrowed apartment that became a home, with a one-eyed giraffe sitting in the middle of a kitchen table, with 2 adults who had every reason to fight each other choosing instead to fight for the same child. It ended the way real stories end, not with everything fixed, but with enough put back together to keep going. Now, before we close, there is something important to understand about the world this story lives in. Renee's story is fiction, but the system she moved through is not. In the United States right now, 80% of women in prison are mothers. 60% of them were never convicted of a violent crime. They are inside for drug offenses, fraud, theft, forgery. Crimes that often begin where desperation meets a system that left no legal door open. And when those mothers go in, their children go somewhere else. Foster care, relatives, group homes, the street. Those children are 5 times more likely to develop a mental health disorder, 3 times more likely to drop out of school, 6 times more likely to end up incarcerated themselves. The cycle does not break on its own. It requires someone to stand at the gate. Here is what makes this even harder to sit with. It costs the American taxpayer between $35,000 and $40,000 per year to incarcerate one person. A comprehensive reentry program, housing, job placement therapy, legal aid costs roughly $5,000 per year, per participant, 7 times cheaper, and the data shows it works. Recidivism drops. Employment rises, families reconnect, children stabilize. The math is simple. The will to act on it is not. And then there is Lyric's illness. Sickle cell disease affects approximately 100,000 people in America. The vast majority are Black. The average lifetime cost of treatment is $1.6 million. Renee went to prison because she could not afford to keep her daughter alive inside a system that was supposed to protect them both. That system still exists. That gap still exists. The billboard on Mass Avenue still promises affordable health care for every family, while mothers like Renee learn the hard way what every actually means. If you are watching this, and you have been through something similar, if you have lost time with your children, if you have been labeled by a system that never asked for your story, if you carry a number where your name used to be, this video is not here to fix anything. But maybe it can remind you of one thing. Your worst decision is not your entire identity, and the time you lost is not the end of your story. If you want to learn more about the issues in this story, look into the National Reentry Resource Center, which provides evidence-based resources for people coming home. The Sentencing Project, which tracks data on incarceration and its impact on families across America. And, if you have a young child affected by a parent's incarceration, Sesame Street's Little Children, Big Challenges program was designed specifically to help kids like Lyric understand what is happening and know they are not alone. Those resources and others are linked in the description below. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story moved, you subscribe, like, and share it. Not for me, but for the Renees and the Lyrics and the Nathaniels who deserve to have their stories heard. See you on the next one. This story is a work of fiction. The characters' names and specific events are not real. However, the systemic issues it portrays, the challenges of reentry, the impact of incarceration on families, the cost of health care in America, and the resilience of mothers who fight for their children are drawn from real statistics, real research, and real lives. I created this story because I believe fiction has the power to make us feel things that statistics alone cannot. If even one person watches this and sees an incarcerated mother differently, not as a criminal but as a human being, then this video did its job. That is why I make these stories, not to go viral, But to make the invisible visible, if you or someone you know is affected by any of the issues in this video, resources are linked in the description below.